The ice hut was conceived from thoughts of frozen toes and a runny nose. And according to Sam, it'd be a nice place to relax and read a good book if the fish weren't biting. It became a living, breathing thing on a cold January day in a carpenter's workshop, several hours from its final destination. Isn't an ice hut something that's designed to give warmth and shelter to cold, weary fishermen? A thing that should be crafted lovingly, with one's own hands? Could it be that it resented being traded for a couple of maple logs cut from Sam's woodlot? Perhaps even inanimate objects have feelings and require an element of respect. Sometimes that respect is inherent, like when you gaze upon a well-crafted fishing rod or reel. Other times it must grow over time, like a new pair of boots. In rare circumstances, the object blatantly demands your respect, something that may take years to realize. Red Green, affectionately named after the fictitious TV handyman, arrived at the lake in late January, the biting depths of a cold southern Ontario winter, during the worst thunderstorm I'd seen in years. Fields were flooded and took on the appearance of small lakes. Streams turned into raging torrents and gnawed through the constraints of their banks at every opportunity. Was it coincidence or an omen of things to come? Dawn and I arrived later that afternoon after navigating back roads that looked like rivers. We were looking forward to relaxing in a nice warm ice hut that would of course by now be sitting on the ice over a school of walleye. Now I should point out that this location is not one where you just drive up and walk out onto the ice. The cottage is a good half-hour walk from where we park the cars. But thanks to the virtues of modern technology, we were able to call Smed and arrange to have him meet us at the parking lot with his snow machine. He usually has two machines with him, one that's left at the parking lot for us to follow him down the cottage road with our luggage, copious fishing equipment, and supplies packed around us. But there was to be nothing usual about this trip. Smed was waiting for us at the parking lot when we arrived. At first glance, it was clear that he was not a happy camper. When I asked where the second sled was, the floodgate opened. "I think I wrecked the friggin' thing when I was trying to pull the frickin' hut down the road," he replied. Now, Smed is not known for being the most patient type, and was not about to wait for help before dragging Red Green down the road, a trait that seems to be more common amongst the male population than is evident with the opposite sex. I guess that's why our wives never join us on these trips. They would never understand our inflexibility and need to act on impulse with no real plan or rationale. Now believe me, I have nothing against and even encourage women to accompany their men on outdoor adventures. But think of how many good stories would have been lost if we always acted in a rational manner. Little more was said as we packed our belongings onto the remaining sled and filled our hands with the rest. We were at a place where the road narrows even further and becomes uneven. When we first laid eyes on Red Green, its two windows peered like two defiant eyes as it teetered on top of a ridge of snow at an awkward angle. There was a sharp bend in one corner of the roof. When I asked Smed what happened, all he said was, "Hit a damn tree." I jokingly queried as to whether the sled broke before or after he hit the tree. "Right after," he said. We all stared at the hut but didn't say another word. Deciding that further discussion might prove hazardous and that discretion might be the best option at this point, we blasted off towards the cottage, unloaded our luggage, and then back down the road we plodded to see if we could convince the damn hut, as it was now affectionately known, to follow us to the lake. Smed manned the remaining sled and slowly took up the slack as we sunk in our heels and pushed at the back of the hut. After a slight protest, it was off again, swaying from side to side down the road. I'm not sure, but judging by the way that he was driving, Smed seemed determined to turn that damn hut into firewood. He rounded the final bend near the cottage, and with the lake only a few meters away, Red Green slammed on the brakes once again. Snow had piled so high at the front of the hut that it brought the sled to a grinding halt. The challenge was now personal. The hut had already ruined Smed's favorite machine and elevated his blood pressure to unimaginable heights, but the battle of wills continued. Normally calm, calculated, and collected, Smed's eyes now glowed and became almost demonic. Blue smoke belched from the sled as Smed was clearly determined to win the battle. Those of us that were still somewhat grounded in reality rushed to the sled and convinced him to concede this one to the hut before we had no sleds to use. Out came the shovels, and soon we were ready to edge onto the ice. Smed was convinced by this time that the hut was alive and hated him. Even though the ice was a good foot thick, he was sure it was doomed to sink. Now I want you to envision the scene. We're sitting atop a slight slope at the edge of the lake, and the lake is obviously frozen solid in spite of the mild temperatures. Remember that it's been raining all day, and there's now a film of water on top of the already slippery ice. The drop-off where we want to drag the hut is about a half a kilometer from our present location. We are pulling the hut, which is indeed quite solid, with a sled that has a rubber track and no studs. Need I say more? In hindsight, the logical thing would have been to head for the cottage, relax, and decide upon the best course of action. That, of course, is not what men on a mission do. Smed sneered at the hut as he revved the engine of the sled, and ever so slowly the damn hut crested the final slope. Getting up a good head of steam going down the slope, we surged onto the ice with Red-Green once again swaying behind the sled. I must admit that it appeared as if our troubles were indeed over as Smed accelerated away from us while we focused all our attention on trying to stay on our feet. Halfway to the fishing hole, the damn hut managed to bring the sled to a halt once again. Water was spraying every which way as Smed revved the engine once again, but the hut refused to move. With Don pushing on the hut and me adding extra traction to the sled, we must have made a great sideshow for the other cottagers as we managed to inch our way to our destination. It always amazes me how quickly adversity becomes nothing more than a good laugh once the adventure ends. A few drams of scotch helped us realize that it was all just a calamity of errors and not worthy of much additional thought. Or was the damn hut merely getting its second wind? As the temperature dropped suddenly that evening, from plus 5 degrees Celsius in the afternoon to negative 25 by 9 o'clock that evening, Red-Green did provide us with the necessary heat to thaw our frozen fingers and toes. In fact, it was downright balmy. No, I should rephrase that. The damn hut was damn hot. It seemed as if the stove was proving to be as temperamental as the hut. It was either too cold or too hot, but never the right temperature. Sam arrived later that night, following the light of our lantern, slipped his way across the ice to the hut. Being the perpetrator of the scheme to build the ice hut, it was no surprise that he would not believe the evil that lurked within the thing, and embraced it with open arms. There was an instant bond between man and hut as Sam gently caressed the dented roof. All in all, it was a good weekend, although with a sudden drop in temperature, the fishing activity followed suit. Memories of our trials and tribulations waned, and with lots of coaching from Sam, we even started to like the hut. That is, until it came time to leave. You see, in his exuberance, Smed had pushed wet, slushy snow around the base of the hut when the temperature started to drop and the wind started to rise, to keep the wind out of the hut. Seemed like a good idea at the time, but let's see, negative 25 plus slush. You guessed it, Red-Green was frozen solid as a rock and refused to budge. Again. Off we trundled to the cottage, returning a short time later manned with pry bars, ropes, and axes. The ice chips flew and the wood groaned, but slowly the hut was extricated from the icy fingers that seemed determined to hold on until spring. Of course, by now we were in the middle of a full-blown blizzard that rolled in suddenly off Lake Huron. Man, we worked like dogs, pushing, pulling, prying, slipping, spinning our way back to shore. Finally, with a final roar from the sled and one great shove, Red-Green rested at the top of the slope near the old outhouse. How appropriate. The hut could give us no more grief now, yet if you look closely, I swear you could see the small windows narrow with a subtle demonic grin, and with one last puff of smoke, we were left wondering what was in store for next year. Maybe we should leave well enough alone and turn the damn hut into a sauna.